43-year-old gushed over her husband during the interview, calling him a fox after Jamie read her supportive words from him.
I'm old enough to be inside.
I like that.
There are moments when celebrity culture and royal tradition collide in a way that feels almost surreal.
Be also happening that the royal family is saying, hey, if you put a book out about Meghan Markle and completely destroy everything and really tell the people how Meghan met Harry.
Not loud, not scandalous, not explosive, just awkward enough to make everyone stop and ask, wait, what are we doing here? That's where Meghan Markle has once again found herself.
Also a fox, if you haven't noticed. My husband's very, very handsome.
At the center of a debate about etiquette, titles, identity, and what it really means to walk away from royalty while still carrying the weight of it. Because this week, it wasn't an interview, a Netflix deal, or a red carpet appearance that ignited discussion. It was a jar of strawberry jam and a signature. The story began quietly. Meghan sent a handmade gift to a longtime friend. Nothing extravagant, nothing performative, just a small gesture. But instead of signing her name simply as Meghan, she added something else. HRH, the Duchess of Sussex. And that detail, barely more than 3 letters and a courtesy title, sent the royal conversation wheel spinning once again. Because even though she and Prince Harry stepped back from royal duties in 2020, the question of what they keep and what they let go of has never really been settled. Not legally, not emotionally, and not publicly.
Royal rumor mill is buzzing after Meghan Markle sent a gift to a friend using her former title, Her Royal Highness, despite the fact that she and Harry stepped away from their royal roles in 2020. Damn them!
What turned this otherwise minor moment into national conversation was not Meghan herself. It was the reaction. On The View, Whoopi Goldberg dismissed the chatter entirely, rolling her eyes and joking that she would need to be woken up when everyone finished arguing about it. Meanwhile, commentators on social media and royal watch forums clashed over whether Meghan was being defiant, sentimental, confused, strategic, or simply doing what was allowed under the original exit agreement. And while Meghan's use of the title might seem like a small detail, it taps into a much larger tension around identity and ownership. Is a title something given to you or something you can claim even after leaving the institution that bestowed it? And this is where the disagreement gets more complicated, because the reported reaction behind palace walls wasn't dismissive, it was emotional. Some royal insiders claim that Prince William was deeply irritated and that he is waiting for the moment he becomes king to remove the remaining parts of their titles once and for all. Whether that's true or not, the idea alone reveals how symbolic these titles still are. They are not just labels, they are leverage, they are legacy, they are history. And when history is personal, the stakes become far less polite. But here's the part most people aren't focusing on.
This has reportedly enraged heir to the throne, Prince William, who wants to officially strip their behinds of the title once and for all.
The real issue may not be Meghan's signature at all. It may be the friend who chose to show it publicly during a podcast conversation. An intimate gesture instantly became public discourse. A private moment became commentary content. And when something meant for one person suddenly becomes fuel for millions of opinions, the meaning changes, whether anyone intended it to or not. Most people think the story ends with a signature on a jar of jam, but it doesn't, because what came next, both in the podcast and online, revealed a very different layer to this situation. And once you see the next part, the entire dynamic between Meghan, her circle, and the royal family looks very different.
Is it a bad look for Meghan to still refer to herself as a royal?
What made this situation escalate wasn't the gesture itself. It was how quickly the conversation around it split into two very different interpretations. On one side, people saw Meghan's signature as harmless and even affectionate, a nod to a chapter of her life that shaped her identity, her marriage, and her role on the global stage. On the other side, critics saw it as calculated, a lingering attempt to hold on to influence tied to a position she publicly walked away from. But here's the part that shook the discussion out of the celebrity news cycle and into something deeper. The signature didn't remain private. The handwritten label appeared during Meghan's appearance on Jamie Kern Lima's podcast, where a simple moment between friends turned into a talking point. That's when the tone changed and the story stopped being about etiquette and started becoming about trust. Because if you sign something in privacy, expecting it to remain personal, and your friend presents it on a public platform, was it still a private gesture at all? And more importantly, who becomes responsible for the fallout? Commentators on The View illustrated that divide in real time. Whoopi Goldberg brushed the story away with humor, signaling fatigue toward the public's obsession with Meghan's every move. But her co-hosts weren't in the same place. Sunny Hostin clarified that Meghan technically did nothing wrong, pointing out that the exit agreement never revoked the title. It only limited how it could be used publicly for promotion or brand leverage. In Sunny's view, this was simply a thoughtful gift between friends, one that followed the rules laid out years earlier under the late Queen. But Alyssa Farah Griffin had a very different reaction. She said the gesture felt cringe in the context of a close friendship, arguing that titles, especially royal ones, carry a tone that shifts intimacy into performance. And that's where the tension sharpens.
The agreement that was made did not remove the title. It restricted the way it was to be used. It was not to be used publicly. And she was giving a friend some strawberry jam that she made herself, and she wrote HRH, the Duchess of Sussex.
So were they strict?
Okay, so that was a private gift.
The moment something personal feels like presentation, even unintentionally, the meaning changes. The title stops being a memory and starts being a message. Whether Meghan meant it that way or not becomes secondary to how it was interpreted. But there was another reaction, one that drew even more attention. Some insiders claimed that Prince William was quietly furious, allegedly waiting for the moment he ascends to the throne to remove the remaining royal styling from both Meghan and Harry entirely. Whether that reflects reality or palace speculation, the conversation itself reveals something often overlooked. Titles in the royal family aren't just symbolic. They're connected to legacy, hierarchy, and emotional history, especially between brothers who once seemed inseparable. And that's the dynamic quietly sitting beneath all of this. Because removing or keeping a title isn't about stationery or etiquette, it's about identity, belonging, and control over how your story is told. When the public sees a jar of jam, they see something simple. But inside the palace, and among those who once lived within it, symbols are rarely simple. They are currency. And that brings us to the part no one has discussed enough. Meghan's appearance on the podcast revealed not just her signature, but an entirely different picture of her marriage and personal life, a version that doesn't align with the narrative many people think they already know. What she said next reframed everything, including why this moment landed the way it did, because the real story here isn't about a title. It's about how Meghan and Harry see themselves now, 7 years into a life that looks nothing like the one they started. And once that comes into focus, the meaning of the signature changes completely. Here's where the narrative takes a turn that most people missed entirely.
Wait, so I can't say Dame Joy Behar anymore?
You can say it to me when you give me the jam,
okay.
right? Because it's private.
All right.
I will also say the Queen did not want Camilla to be called the Queen. The Queen wanted Camilla to be called the Queen Consort.
Meghan's appearance on Jamie Kern Lima's podcast wasn't just a friendly reunion or a feel-good conversation. It quietly revealed the emotional architecture of her life with Harry now, after the storm, after the interviews, after the documentaries, after the public battles. And what Meghan shared about their relationship didn't sound like a couple haunted by the past or defensive about their choices. Instead, she described something surprisingly steady. She talked about peace, not as a performance, not as a slogan, but as something earned. The kind of peace that comes after surviving something together that threatened to break you both. When she described Harry as a fox and then emphasized that his heart is even more beautiful than his appearance, it didn't feel rehearsed. It felt like someone speaking from a place of perspective. A place reached only after being pushed to the edge and finding the other person still standing there. This matters because so much of the public conversation around Meghan and Harry remains frozen in the earliest chapters of their story, when everything was dramatic, emotional, and deeply unstable. Those months when they fell in love were immediately overshadowed by scrutiny, headlines, judgment, and international pressure. Meghan reminded listeners that they didn't just date, they survived. 6 months into knowing each other, they were thrust into one of the most intense public environments imaginable. Their early relationship wasn't candlelit dinners and quiet weekends. It was crisis management. And when a relationship begins in a state of fight or flight, sometimes the softness doesn't emerge until years later, when the adrenaline finally wears off.
Okay,
Right, he's going to do the same
thing. So if she can be the Queen, Meghan can be HRH.
I think
my opinion.
That's the part Meghan was describing, this second phase, this unexpected honeymoon chapter that arrived 7 years in, when life finally gave them room to simply be. But this is where the tension sharpens again, because the public is not used to seeing Meghan and Harry through the lens of calm. The narrative that drives engagement, commentary, and endless debate is built on conflict. Royal versus renegade, tradition versus independence, institution versus individual. Peace isn't profitable, peace doesn't keep tabloids fed, peace doesn't trend. So when Meghan describes their life now as grounded, supportive, affectionate, even joyful, it doesn't fit the storyline many are invested in, particularly when there are still unresolved emotional fractures between Harry and his family, especially his brother. For some, Meghan embracing her current reality while still signing as HRH feels like holding on to two narratives at once, the past that hurt her and the present that healed her. And that's where critics find leverage, because if peace is real, why keep the title? And if the title still matters, how resolved is the past really? Except there's another interpretation, one that reframes the entire situation. The title may not be a claim to power. It may be a reminder of identity, a recognition of the journey, not the privilege. Meghan stepped into that world, survived it, and left because she had to. A signature on a jam jar may not be a flex. It may be closure. But something else was happening in the background during that podcast appearance. Something subtle, but telling. Something that reveals what's at stake now, not in the past, but in what comes next. Because this isn't just about titles or marriage dynamics. This is about reputation positioning. And someone else, not Meghan, is controlling the narrative more than people realize. To understand why this moment touched off such a strong reaction across media, you have to look at how narratives around Meghan are shaped and who benefits from shaping them. Meghan didn't release the photo of the gift. She didn't highlight the signature. She didn't frame the message. It was her friend who revealed the HRH label on a public podcast. Whether intentionally or not, that choice shifted a private gesture into a public symbol. And symbols can be weaponized. The moment the image appeared online, royal commentators, tabloid media, and social platforms didn't react to the friendship behind the gift. They reacted to the implication of the title. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't about Meghan being thoughtful. It was about Meghan holding on to royalty. And once that spark lit, the discussion grew louder than the gift itself. This is where the conversation around influence comes in. Meghan has spent years trying to reshape her identity outside of the royal framework. Philanthropy, content deals, business investments, speaking engagements. But once a title reappears, even in private, it reopens the question of whether she has truly detached from the institution she walked away from. Critics seized that contradiction immediately. Supporters saw something different, a woman who survived an environment that nearly broke her and who has every right to acknowledge the path she walked. Two interpretations, same signature, completely different meaning, but the palace side of the story brings in an entirely different layer of tension. The suggestion that Prince William may be waiting until he becomes king to revoke what remains of Meghan and Harry's titles is not just a procedural issue. It's emotional. It speaks to unresolved fractures, lingering resentment, and a sense of betrayal layered on both sides. To remove a title is not just to revise status, it is to sever history. And while the legal mechanism to do that exists, the symbolic consequences would be seismic. It would mark the moment when the personal rift between two brothers becomes institutional. And that is why the rumor carries weight. It signals that the emotional distance isn't healing, it's widening. But here's where the real peak of the narrative emerges. Meghan's newfound honeymoon phase with Harry, the piece she described on the podcast, exists at the same time as a Cold War surrounding identity, belonging, and public perception. Two realities running parallel. One intimate and flourishing, one political and unresolved. It's not that Meghan is trying to hold on to royalty. It's that royalty, in a strange way, has never fully released her. Even when she steps back, the narrative continues without her consent. Even when she moves forward, the past is revived whenever beneficial to someone else's storyline, and that's the core tension. The world is still deciding who Meghan is. Yet Meghan appears to have already decided for herself. The disconnect between those two truths is where the drama lives. And that drama is far from over, because the question now is not about whether she used a title. The real question is what happens when the palace finally responds. And based on recent private briefings and public relations shifts inside the royal press office, something is already in motion. What happens next doesn't depend on Meghan's signature or Harry's interviews or even how the public reacts. It depends on the palace, because titles, symbolism, and legacy are managed not emotionally, but strategically. And according to multiple royal correspondents, the conversations happening behind closed doors in London now aren't about what Meghan did. They're about how this moment looks from a monarchy in transition. King Charles is aging. William is stepping into more direct leadership roles. The family's image is shifting into a new era, one that needs unity, clarity, and a clean public narrative. And Meghan, intentionally or not, remains a wild card in that narrative. Every gesture she makes, even in private, can still ripple across the institution she left. what many people don't see is that this isn't just a public relations dispute, it's about legacy continuity. Harry was born into a structure where titles aren't just ceremonial, they represent lineage, duty, and national identity. Meghan entered that world and then made the choice to leave it because staying required a level of silence, conformity, and emotional sacrifice that she was unwilling to make. The institution doesn't resent her for leaving. It resents that she left loudly, and every moment where Meghan appears calm, fulfilled, grounded, or happy in the life she built beyond the monarchy creates a subtle tension with the narrative that leaving was reckless or impulsive. The happier she is now, the more the original decision looks justified. And that is what the palace is actually responding to. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry's relationship appears to be strengthening under that distance. When Meghan described this current phase as a new honeymoon, she wasn't describing a fantasy. She was describing the calm that emerges after you stop defending yourself to the world. Their marriage now seems to exist on its own terms, not the institution's terms, not the media's terms, not the public's expectations. And when a couple reaches that level of alignment, symbols, like titles, can become something different than what outsiders assume. They become markers of history, not identity, acknowledgments of where you've been, not claims to where you are. But for those watching the royal family, the next chapter may hinge on timing. If William waits until he becomes king to revisit Meghan and Harry's titles, the decision will be seen not as administrative, but emotional, a full-circle institutional response to a personal fracture, and the world will read it not as protocol, but as a statement. So the question is no longer, should Meghan have signed HRH on a jar of homemade jam? The real question is, why does such a small gesture still carry this much weight? And the answer is simple. Because the monarchy is not just a family, it is a story, and Meghan and Harry are no longer characters the palace gets to write. This situation isn't over, not because of the signature, but because there is still unfinished business between two brothers, two households, and two versions of the same history. And when the palace eventually makes its next move, everyone will know exactly what message it was meant to send.